when a young Mennonite woman was found dead in Arizona.
He has a gun.
He has it?
He has it. Let's go.
The police were desperate to discover why someone would take her several hours away from her home in New Mexico, only to shoot her dead and dump her body.
Go.
Sheriff's office, get out of the car!
Get on the car!
Turn off the car! Step out now!
Little did they know that as they worked with the Mennonite community to solve this terrible crime, authorities would end up discovering a decade's worth of unsolved crimes, all leading back to one depraved man.
Get your hands up! Step away from the car!
On February 22, 2020, Cynthia Schultz was pleasantly spending her morning collecting firewood for her camp at the Sunset Crater National Park, around 20 miles from Flagstaff, Arizona. While out, Cynthia spotted a woman lying face down in the dirt. Thinking something might be wrong, she called out to the woman. However, when she didn't respond, Cynthia had a horrifying revelation. The woman was dead. Cynthia alerted the authorities, and soon the area was swarmed with police, trying to get to the bottom of this tragedy.
He didn't move or nothing. They went and checked her, and okay. Rigid is a rigor mortis. She was real stiff, cold.
It was immediately clear to the detectives that this case was a homicide, as the victim had a gunshot wound to the head and her hands were bound together with duct tape. As they inspected the body closer, they noticed that the victim was wearing very modest and traditional clothes, which made them suspect she might be a Mennonite. Mennonites are a Christian denomination that practice a conservative lifestyle, dedicating themselves to their religion and only using technology that's strictly necessary, such as basic phones. Through forensic comparisons, the police were able to identify the mysterious victim as 27-year-old Sasha Kraus, a Mennonite woman who had gone missing from New Mexico on January 18th, over a month before she was discovered. While police may have finally been able to give their victim a name, it was now time to uncover her horrific story and find out the truth about how she ended up murdered in a national park nearly 300 miles from her home. Through interviews and investigation, the police were able to determine that Sasha was a Sunday school teacher who had worked and lived on the Lamp and Light compound, a Mennonite community in Farmington, New Mexico. On the night of her disappearance, Sasha was making a quick late-night stop by the Sunday school to finish an errand. When she failed to come home that night, Sasha's roommates alerted the community and the police were soon involved. Unfortunately, the case had hit a dead end fairly soon after beginning, and it seemed like Sasha had simply vanished into thin air. However, not only did authorities now have Sasha's body, they were also able to recover her phone, a key piece of evidence that could likely point them in the direction of their killer. Through phone records, the police were able to deduce that Sasha hadn't just vanished. She'd been kidnapped. As her kidnapper drove her to Arizona, Sasha's phone could be seen pinging off of select phone towers before it died. Throughout her entire trip to Arizona, there was only one other device pinging off of those same towers, and it belonged to a man named Mark Gooch. Mark Gooch was an airman working at Luke Air Force Base in Arizona, and at first glance it appeared he had nothing in common with Sasha outside of his cell phone records. Nevertheless, Lauren Nagel, the lead detective on the case, traveled to Luke Air Force Base and sat down with Mark for questioning. Detective Nagel introduces herself as Detective Jones, as she got married at some point between this interview and her appearance in court.
Hi, thank you for your patience. That would work out that way. I asked you to come talk with me, and then, obviously, I get a phone call, right? Alright, so, I'm Detective Jones. I'm with the Sheriff's Office. I'm sure you're wondering what I want to chat with you about. Of course, I'm about to fill you in. We just gotta go through some procedural stuff first.
The interview takes place in an interrogation room on Luke Air Force Base and is an ideal setup according to the Reed technique, a popular method of interrogation. There's no barrier between Detective Nagel and Mark, allowing her to observe all of his movements and nonverbal communication. The walls appear to be bare, which is intentional to minimize distractions. It's also helpful that there's only one detective present, which can make the interview feel less threatening. Additionally, Mark is seated near the door, which helps send the message that he's able to leave at any time. This may make him less defensive and more likely to talk. It can also help prevent any false imprisonment claims later. Detective Nagel and Mark speak briefly about his responsibilities as a mechanic in the Air Force before the detective asks about Mark's life back home.
So what'd you do before Air Force then?
I worked in the diesel mechanic shop for about a year and did construction as well and grew up on a dairy farm. So.
Oh yeah? That's pretty cool. Do you have siblings?
Yes, ma'am. 6.
Oh wow, really?
Yep.
Okay, big family. Yeah. Tell me about them, like how many brothers, sisters?
3 brothers and 3 sisters.
Okay, got it. And where are they at now?
All over the country.
All over?
Yes, ma'am.
Are you the youngest?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Who would you say you're closest with?
I don't know, we kind of got separated pretty good after everybody started moving out.
So you're not close with any of them though?
I talk with them on the phone here and there, but I'm probably closest. Maybe my brother back in Wisconsin.
Oh, gotcha. Which brother's that?
It's Sam.
Sam. Okay.
Mark comes across as a polite, well-mannered airman, but as we'll see over the course of the interview, this is just a facade.
So what do you do on your time off?
Play on my computer sometimes, play some games, go hiking as much as possible, but work on my car and bike a lot too. Try to stay active.
Cool. Do you like go to church or anything like that?
No, man, the church closed down.
Oh, that's closed too?
Coronavirus.
Got you. Is that something that you did before it closed?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am. I would attend church quite a bit.
Okay. If you don't mind me asking about that, what kind of religion did you grow up in?
We grew up in a Christian, I guess the religion, I guess is how you call it, but Christianity is how I was raised.
Oh, okay. Any like specific denomination of Christianity?
Mainly they were called Mennonites or Amish. I'm not sure how familiar you are with that.
Not really. Tell me about that.
But basically drive darker colored vehicles. We use flip phones when you have internet, stuff like that. So it was pretty sheltered, you could say.
Pretty sheltered.
Difficult.
I got it.
With this admission, the police now have another unexpected link between Mark and Sasha. They're both Mennonites. When the detective brings up the topic of religion, Mark starts to fumble with his words, indicating that the topic of religion may be something Mark doesn't want to talk about.
In that last 6 months, have you traveled out of state anywhere?
Yes, ma'am. When I came down here, I drove my car from Wisconsin down here.
Oh, okay. So you drove from Wisconsin to Phoenix?
Correct.
Anywhere else?
Pretty much state of Arizona. I try to do as much hiking as possible.
Mark doesn't know it yet, but he's just been caught in his first lie, the first of many. Using words like pretty much, mostly, and similar sentiments are qualifiers and often throw up a red flag to detectives. These words usually indicate half-truths or that there's something the individual may not wish to disclose. In this case, Mark saying that he pretty much stays in Arizona isn't true at all, and he's hiding something very big. He also uses filler sounds such as to delay answering so he has time to think about his response.
You're probably wondering, why I'm here. So I'm a detective. I'm with Coconino County Sheriff's Office.
Okay.
And I am working a homicide investigation.
Okay.
There was a girl named Sasha Krause that was killed. Did you hear about that case?
I've seen it in the news. Yes, ma'am.
Tell me what you know about the case.
It's basically the news report. She was from New Mexico, right?
Mm-hmm.
And she left home one evening, and they found her in northern Arizona, like Flagstaff area, correct?
Right. So that's the case that I'm working. Any idea now why I'd want to talk to you at all?
Probably because I was probably traveling up in New Mexico area, probably.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
As the detective reveals why she's here interviewing him, Mark begins to show more and more signs that he may be hiding something. When asked what he knows about Sasha Krause's murder, Mark vaguely says that they found her. This is a soft way to describe something as violent as a homicide.
And they found her in northern Arizona.
When suspects shy away from using realistic words such as murdered or killed, this can be a red flag for possible deception as they're minimizing the crime. Additionally, Mark uses the qualifier probably 3 times in 8 seconds.
Probably because I was probably traveling up in New Mexico area, probably.
So we've got these things called license plate readers,
Okay.
and your vehicle hit a license plate reader in that area. So tell me about that. You were traveling then. I'm a little confused because at first you said you hadn't traveled, but now did you go to New Mexico?
Yes, ma'am.
Your vehicle was picked up on that license plate reader in the general area on the same day actually that she went missing. And so what I'm doing at this point is I got to talk to everybody, as you can imagine. That's my job. Anybody who's in the area, anybody who could have seen something.
Despite the fact that Mark appears to be intentionally lying, Detective Nagel does a great job of calling him out for it while also remaining non-judgmental. She does this in order to keep Mark from feeling threatened and ending the interview, while also not letting him get comfortable in any of the lies he tells. The more someone repeats a lie, the more confident they will become. She also keeps him calm by not telling him the whole truth about why she's there. Although she's telling Mark that she's just interviewing everyone who got picked up on a certain license plate reader, we know that Mark is actually her #1 suspect, and that he was found through phone records. This is just one example of the ways detectives can lie during interviews in order to get a suspect to tell them the truth.
So why were you in New Mexico that day?
I was planning on going, so I was checking out Mennonite churches. I had traveled up to Flagstaff.
Mark takes a big pause after he says he traveled, followed by his foot twitching, and then he says to Flagstaff.
I had traveled up to Flagstaff.
This is something called a cadence switch, which is essentially a disruption in the flow and inflection of speech. In an interrogation, this can be seen as an indication of something being left out of a story, as the speaker paused and changed their speech pattern.
I was hoping that ski resort was still open.
Yeah.
They were closed due to coronavirus starting up.
Mm-hmm.
And so I figured I'd go check out a Mennonite church up in that area. So I knew some people from Wisconsin that used to live there.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to go just attend because I've really been missing that social life.
Yeah.
I used to have at Mennonite churches.
Is there any reason why you didn't tell me when I asked you if you've traveled? You didn't mention that to me. Is there a reason that you didn't?
No, man, I'm sorry. My memory just, I don't know. It's not what it used to be. I'm tired today.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry if I failed to mention that, but
Okay.
I was not trying to hide or withhold information.
Okay, thanks.
Once again, Mark is caught in a lie. While explaining why he was in New Mexico, he mentions that he was wanting to go skiing. However, the ski resort he drove to, the Arizona Snow Bowl Ski Resort in Flagstaff, was closed due to COVID-19 restrictions. In actuality, the Snow Bowl didn't close for COVID until March, well after Mark would have been there on January 18th. As he says this, he half shrugs with his right shoulder. It's barely perceptible, but lines up when he says, "I don't know." Internally, he does know, and is just making excuses, but he's not confident in his memory excuse. Mark is also sitting with his leg crossed in a way that creates a barrier between himself and the detective. He switched to this guarded position after he was asked about traveling. When questioned about why he didn't mention this trip earlier, Mark's military formality helps him appear more truthful than he's actually being. He refers to Detective Nagel as ma'am and immediately apologizes for not mentioning the trip because he was tired. Unfortunately for Mark, no matter how polite he is, this omission is definitely a sign that he has a reason to keep this trip a secret, and the detective has certainly picked up on that.
Do you remember that day then when you went to New Mexico?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think I remember some of it.
So what time about did you leave here, Luke Air Force Base?
Probably left fairly early in the morning.
Okay.
And then what time did you say I was in the area?
I'd have to go grab I've got like the charts, the paper.
Okay.
What time? Well, let's go through the day. So when you say fairly early, what does that mean to you?
Probably about 7.
Okay.
7 is when I left to head up there.
Mm-hmm.
Stopped in Flagstaff for a while. Just got some, got some fuel, I believe.
This is one of the last fully truthful statements Mark says while recounting his trip to New Mexico. While he may think he's being sneaky with his lies, Detective Nagel knows a lot more than she's letting on, and is ready to catch every lie Mark throws her way.
Did you go anywhere else while you're in Flagstaff?
Nope, no, not on the way up. Yeah, pretty much straight driving. Had a really pretty snow-capped mountain up there.
Yeah.
At that time.
So you stopped in Flagstaff, you got gas, and then you think that you drove directly to the church in Farmington?
I stopped in Farmington to get some fuel.
Watch how the detective suddenly starts kicking her foot. Since this discussion is about the scene of the crime, she likely feels a lot of pressure with these questions, trying to make sure she gets his story, and also has what she needs to confront him later. With all of his deceptive behavior already, she's likely fairly certain that he is the person she's looking for, and these are really the high-stakes questions.
About 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I had swung by the church just to check their sign and see what time their services was, and they were, let me think, I think it was just Sunday evening.
At this point in the investigation, Detective Nagel has spent a lot of time at Sasha's church, looking for any sign of what happened to her on January 18th. In her entire time there, the detective has never seen any sign even somewhat similar to the one Mark is claiming to have checked.
Did you, talk to anybody while you were there?
No, there was no one at the church, and I didn't want to bother anybody, so.
Did you like it? I don't know, what is it a church that, like what you grew up in, or different?
It looked fairly similar, but it's not really the same, so I'm a little disappointed with the whole long drive and everything. I didn't really see it as working out long term to make it there.
Yeah, that is a long drive.
It'd be way too far to drive every weekend, so I talked to my friend. He wanted to go hiking on Sunday, and I really wanted to make it for that. I work with him in the shop. And
who's that friend?
His name's Kefley.
Mark claims that he made plans with Kefley to go hiking the following day. However, according to Kefley himself, the two actually went to a swap meet, also known as a flea market.
From what I'm understanding, it doesn't sound like you were there for very long.
No, man.
And then where did you go after that?
I'm trying to remember if I was going to go look for a hike, or did I head straight back? I think I started, once he called me about the hike on Sunday, I think I started heading back.
He called you?
Correct.
While you were over there?
Correct.
Okay.
According to Mark, Kefley called him to discuss plans. However, the phone records disagree with Mark. Mark and Kefley only texted that day, and in fact, the only person that Mark spoke to on the phone was his brother Sam. Not only did Mark and Sam call, but they actually called each other 6 times, for a total of nearly 2.5 hours, which is longer than the two had talked on the phone for the last 6 months combined.
On the way back home, did you stop anywhere?
I don't know, I might have made it to Phoenix on a full tank, I don't know. I'd have to check.
Okay. So am I understanding correctly, you don't remember stopping anywhere?
No, ma'am.
Is that fair to say?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Do you remember what time you got back here to home?
It was fairly late. It was probably 8 or 9 o'clock. So I got back.
Long day, man.
Yep.
Mark makes a lot of lip and mouth movements here, known as micro-expressions. One of the biggest indicators of deception and hiding something is a movement called disappearing lips, which Mark demonstrates. Once again, Mark's account of the trip contradicts his phone records. While he might say that he went straight home from New Mexico, the records actually show him stopping in Sunset Crater National Park for several hours. With Mark having officially told his story about where he was on the day of Sasha's murder, Detective Nagel is noticing more and more red flags. Mark consistently lies, hesitates, and supposedly struggles to recall information when he is asked about stops he made, times, and what he was doing at specific points throughout his trip. When a suspect has a memory of extremes, meaning their memory is either too good or too bad, this is seen as a red flag to detectives. Just over 2 months have passed since January 18th, so it doesn't make sense that Mark is struggling so much to recall basic information about his trip. Given that this trip was pretty out of the ordinary for him, the trip should actually stick out in his mind even more.
What do you think should happen to the person that did that to Sasha?
As far as Like, what are you getting at there?
But if we caught the person who killed her, what should happen to them?
Well, you should probably let the law deal with it. Or maybe the Mennonite community has a way of doing things differently.
In the Reed technique, this line of questioning is known as the punishment question, and it can be a good indicator of deception. Individuals who give vague answers are more likely to be deceptive than those who answer with strong, definitive punishments. Mark pauses for an incredibly long time after being asked what he thinks should happen to Sasha's killer, and he eventually settles on, "I don't know." This is the exact type of vague answer that sets off alarm bells for detectives when it comes to the punishment question. After a few more questions, Detective Nagel tells Mark that she's going to step out for just a few minutes to review her notes. After letting Mark stew for 10 minutes, Detective Nagel comes back in and gets ready to really take Mark's story apart and figure out what exactly it is that he's lying about.
On the way back, what time did you come back through the gate?
It was dark, possibly 8 or 9. Probably later than that, I'm not sure.
So what's like a reasonable time frame? So like you're saying around 8 or 9, like what's the latest you think you possibly came through that gate?
Probably could have been 1 or 2. 8 or 9 to 1 or 2 is probably the most time frame that I can think of.
Okay.
It was dark when I came through.
It's kind of a big time frame there, though.
I understand.
8 p.m. to 2 a.m. is pretty different.
I understand.
Okay. So you want to stick with that?
Yes, ma'am.
Now that Detective Nagel has informed Mark his story doesn't add up, it's likely that he's going to respond with even less specifics than he was before, hence his 6-hour time span. If Mark is adamant that he got home at 8 p.m., but then video footage shows otherwise, it will reflect badly on his credibility. On the other hand, if he admits that it was 2 a.m. when he got home, then there's a large chunk of time that's completely unaccounted for between Mark leaving the church and arriving home. While Mark might be trying to avoid getting caught in a lie by avoiding specifics, in actuality, this just makes him even more suspicious.
So what if I told you that the time that you came in the gate that morning was 6:53 in the morning?
Would not guess it was that late.
That's a long time.
Yes, ma'am.
So how do you explain that?
I stopped and slept in the car. On the way back, I had trouble staying awake. Tried to stop and sleep multiple times, but that's couldn't really sleep. It was cold.
Okay.
On the drive back.
Okay.
Now Mark has to scramble to fill in the gaps that Detective Nagel is pointing out. Mark claimed he left at 7 in the morning on January 18th, and according to the detective's records, he didn't get home until nearly that same time the following morning. Not only is this around 10 hours after the original time Mark gave for when he got home, but it's almost 5 hours after the revised time he gave. It's also highly suspicious that he has never mentioned this supposed nap he took in his car on the way home. And it definitely comes across that Mark is doing anything he can to try and cover up his lies.
Have you gone to Flagstaff any more than that one time?
No, ma'am. Except when I came down from Wisconsin to Duluth. I don't remember which route I took coming in.
Okay. So after this New Mexico trip, you have not gone back up to Flagstaff again, is that right?
Not to my knowledge.
Mark saying not to my knowledge doesn't make sense here, because how could he travel somewhere without his knowledge? This is a selective memory statement, but in this situation, it also just doesn't even fit with the statement, and he would have been better off going with "I'm not sure," or "I don't think so," or some other selective memory statement. He must be starting to really feel some anxiety about this, because his thought processes are less logical and his word choices aren't great.
So I know that you went back up to Flagstaff a couple days later.
Okay.
And I've got a couple different ways to confirm that, like your gate checkouts and evidence that you were up in Flagstaff. So did you go back to Flagstaff for some reason a couple days later?
Possibly went for a drive. Went to go. I don't remember.
When asked about going to Flagstaff again, Mark hesitates for a long time before answering. Significant delays can be a red flag for deception. Some questions require thought, so it would make sense for someone to stop and think before answering. However, it doesn't take this much thought to remember if you recently went to a town 2 hours away from where you live, meaning that Mark's hesitation just comes off as suspicious. Clearly, Mark isn't going to be truthful about what he was really up to on January 18th. So Detective Nagel changes gears and starts asking Mark more about his Mennonite connection to Sasha.
Earlier when we were talking, you mentioned how when you're not born into the Mennonite church, we use that word outsider. Like you're kind of an outsider compared to like people who are born in. Sasha was like that too. Did you know that? Her family was not born into Mennonite church. So I'm wondering if you're willing to kind of tell me. I noticed I just saw a little bit of an emotion in you when we talked about that. Is there something that happened to you in the Mennonite church that upsets you?
Not really. It's just the way of life, and I didn't really like it, and I was happy to be out of it. My parents left the church.
By stating not really, he's denying anything happened to him, but not strongly. By using a qualifying statement instead of just saying no, it suggests that there is something, but he doesn't want to talk about it.
Okay. So Mark, what I do for a living is talk to people.
Understood.
And I just feel like I can read people a little. I know I don't know you. I'm not going to even pretend I do. But there's something there. And is it just something you don't want to talk about? Something that happened that made you leave the church?
No, ma'am. I pretty much left the church when my parents decided to leave.
Okay.
Mark uses another qualifier, but what is more interesting are his lip movements. It seems like his lip movements are his fidgeting behaviors, but he's probably had some training about not showing anxiety both in the home he grew up in, as well as in the military, so he doesn't have a lot of the bigger nonverbal cues that we look for. Yet these lip movements, which continue to return to the disappearing lips, make it clear that he's withholding information. It's almost like he's trying to hold in whatever it is he really wants to say. While Mark may be playing it cool, the detective knows he's hiding something. Before this interview even began, Detective Nagel was able to go through Mark's text messages and saw some concerning things regarding his views on Mennonites. In a text conversation, Mark and Sam are told by their brother Jacob, a Virginia state trooper, that he had just given 2 Mennonites a speeding ticket. Mark and Sam are both overjoyed to hear this, and Mark even says that he hopes that Jacob treated the Mennonites like shit. Sam makes a point of calling the Mennonites cultists, giving some insight into how he and his brothers feel about the religion. In another conversation between just Mark and Sam, Mark tells Sam that his surveillance on the Arizona Mennonites that morning was boring. The use of the word surveillance was incredibly alarming to authorities, and clued them into the fact that he may have been planning some kind of attack on the community for quite a while.
We have a detective talking to Sam right now.
Okay.
In Wisconsin. Okay? And so I want you to know that for this main reason. Sam's telling us some stuff, and you're talking to me, and I want to just make sure, what both of you guys are telling us lines up. And
sure.
what I know a little bit about from what Sam said sounds like something's going on here as far as like maybe you have hard feelings against the Mennonite church, or maybe like a grudge or something like that.
So let me get this straight. You're talking with Sam right now, huh? Mm-hmm. So it sounds like I need to get a lawyer because you're trying to pin something on me.
Well, I read you your rights at the beginning of this.
Yes, ma'am. And I'd like to see a lawyer now.
You would like to speak with the lawyer?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So I'm not going to ask you any more questions then. I am going to have you sit here for a few minutes.
Understood.
And then I'm going to kind of explain to you what else is going on today, okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. You go without water?
Correct.
All right.
Detective Nagel is using a bit of the prisoner's dilemma technique, pinning one suspect against the other. We see him do a big anchor point movement immediately after, and his illustrators don't line up with his words. As soon as the detective leaves the room, Mark unbarriers his legs. Detective Nagel's comments clearly struck a nerve with Mark, and for the first time, we see him change his reaction and become stern. He clearly doesn't like that his brother is also being interviewed. Perhaps Mark has good reason to fear that Sam will say too much to the cops, as while Sam refused to answer the majority of questions during his brief interview, he did say one thing that caught detectives' attention. Not only did Sam claim that Mark had a grudge against Mennonites, but when asked if he knew why the cops were questioning him, Sam ominously replied no, but that he knew his brother and how he is, giving police even more reason to be suspicious of Mark. With his interview concluded, Mark was served several search warrants for his phone, apartment, and car, all of which proved to be very enlightening to the authorities. The first thing investigators noticed when looking at Mark's car was how spotless it was. Upon further inspection, they were able to recover a receipt that showed Mark had gotten his car heavily detailed on February 23rd, the day after it was announced to the public that Sasha's body had been found. Additionally, the police also discovered some black nitrile gloves in the car, alongside some suspicious stains. Now that detectives are finally able to scour Mark's phone, more inconsistencies begin to pop up. According to his deletion records, Mark had deleted several files and documents from his Google account early in the morning of January 19th, after returning home from his New Mexico trip. He also deleted several texts with Sam where he discussed getting his car detailed, stating that he wanted the detailers to clean the interior really well. With several concerning, if somewhat circumstantial things found in Mark's phone and car, they had enough to detain him. However, police still didn't have enough evidence to actually connect Mark to Sasha's killing, never mind justify an arrest and guarantee a conviction. There was still the puzzling question of why, as there was no clear motive why Mark would have killed Sasha. Investigators soon began interviewing and interrogating the people closest to him in the hopes that they could shed some light on the case. First, they started with Alex Golub, Mark's good friend from basic training. For the most part, Alex said that Mark seemed completely normal throughout their friendship. However, there was one odd moment Alex mentioned that really stuck out to detectives.
Has Mark ever talked about killing people to you?
No, ma'am. Just the text that we did have. We were going to go spec ops together, and we were kind of looking at TAC B. And he mentioned in one of the texts that something like he'd be happy to get paid for killing people.
Exactly.
But I was just like, oh, I mean, that's kind of like a Gooch thing. It's just a weird thing to say. So I was like, oh, that's just Gooch. And also, you know, it's the enemy. So I mean, I don't really take it as like he's wanting to kill innocents. It's more like the enemy. Okay.
These are exactly what you're referring to, probably. See that the highlighted conversation between you guys?
Yes, ma'am.
Is that what you were just talking about?
Let's go TAC B together. Yes, ma'am. Do you have the one where it says he? Yes.
Where it says, I would like to get paid to kill people.
Right.
And I don't have the next page, but from what I recall of that conversation, you didn't say, whoa, man, that's weird. Or, you guys kind of just went on.
I think I just typed his name in all caps, because that's what I would always say.
Okay.
If he said something just, like, strange.
While Alex laughed off Mark's comment, there's no denying that it's concerning. This text from Mark implies that he may have been harboring these sorts of morbid desires long before targeting Sasha.
It was about respect too. Like one guy in our sister class, he had his feet up on the desk one day, and Gooch was like, "Oh, you should probably get your feet off the desk." Mm-hmm. And the other dude made a snarky comment like, "Oh, you're telling me what to do," kind of thing now.
Yeah.
And I could tell that Gooch got pretty mad at that. I was like, "Calm down."
Okay.
From Alex's story about Mark, we can see some indications that Mark may struggle with anger control. The story is also indicative of excessive rigidity. People who are very rigid when it comes to social rules may often get into confrontations with others because they can't cope with seeing any rule-breaking behaviors they deem inappropriate. While this might seem contradictory at first, given the accusations against Mark, he may feel that the rules don't apply to him. This is a trait typically found in individuals with antisocial personality disorder.
How do you remember Mark reacting to stress?
Just stiff as a board, very disciplined. Never screamed back, never lost his cool, kind of thing.
Okay.
You'd see his face get red, but I thought he was just embarrassed.
Alex describes Mark as stiff as a board and mentions his face turning red. These traits, in conjunction with how we saw Mark acting during his interview, could be signs that he's emotionally cut off. This is another trait that's common among individuals with antisocial personality disorder and is tied to their overall lack of empathy. While these few indicators certainly aren't enough to give Mark a full diagnosis, they can give us some insight into how he might think. As investigators questioned those around Mark, they learned something very interesting that could blow this case wide open. According to Kemper Kepley, Mark's best friend at Luke Air Force Base, Mark had secretly kept a gun on base for several months. However, he'd recently given the gun to another friend to store off base. Detectives were quick to track this gun down and bring it in for testing, which showed that it was the same caliber as the bullet that killed Sasha. However, while the police were in possession of Mark's gun, the case took a turn none of the investigators were expecting.
I got a text just a few minutes ago from Sam Gooch that said Mark Gooch had said that I could help him out with his possessions.
The detective is fine with Kemper working with Sam to get some of Mark's belongings. However, he does have one request.
He starts asking about the gun. That's what we want to know about.
Right.
And,
Okay.
And don't, provide him any information that you know about the gun. If you can help that. So, we're asking you not to do that.
Within a week of this call with Kemper, detectives were notified that Sam had reached out to Jeremiah Levesque, the last person who had Mark's gun before it was given to the police. While working with Jeremiah, the police listened in on a phone call between him and Sam, where Sam made plans to travel across state lines to Arizona in order to dispose of Mark's gun before the police could get it. In the call, Sam told Jeremiah, "Considering what's going on, if you're comfortable, I would say get rid of the gun any way you deem fit. If not, I will deal with it whenever I get there." Jeremiah was then able to arrange a meetup point with Sam where they planned to trade Mark's gun. However, unbeknownst to Sam, Jeremiah had been given a replica gun by the police, and officers were going to be covertly hidden around the meetup site, waiting to make their arrest.
Target just pulled into the second parking spot.
Yeah, no problem. There you go, sir.
Hey, move.
That's good. Hey, call it in.
I can't. My phone. Where's your phone? Shit. Target's getting back in his car.
He's got the gun.
Target has a gun.
He has it?
He has it. Let's go. Go.
Sheriff's office, get out of the car!
Get on the car.
Turn off the car! Step out now! Get your hands up! Step away from the car! Step towards me! Turn away from me now! Get on your knees! Get on your knees! Put your hands behind your head! Passenger, get out of the car! Passenger, in the back, get out of the car!
With their sting operation successful and Sam Gooch arrested, it was time for the detectives to find out why Sam was so set on disposing of Mark's gun. Detective Troy Short was sent in to interrogate Sam, and he was immediately met with resistance.
You want to start from the beginning and
I believe you think I know more than I do, and
so explain me what that means. You know what I mean? If I know more than you do, help me understand that.
I don't think this is going to be a productive conversation for me, and
Do you want to tell me about tonight?
No, sir.
Okay. If you want to tell me why you guys came halfway across the country to pick up a gun?
No, sir.
Okay. Do you understand why you're here in the room?
Yes, sir.
Here's the deal, Sam. A part of me even feels bad right now because, like I told you back in Wisconsin, you weren't a focus. You weren't a suspect.
Mm-hmm.
And now, because of some bad choices, you're in some serious trouble. Not as serious as Mark by any means. You know what I mean? He's in some serious trouble, and I tried to explain that to you back there. Is there anything you can do to help yourself right now, or help yourself out of this mess, or?
As much as I would like to, I frankly do not believe you have my best interest in mind.
Okay.
And I do not think discussing this with you would be helpful.
While Sam may be refusing to give the detective the answers he's looking for, he has yet to actually invoke his Miranda rights. Whether or not Sam knows this, refusing to answer a line of questioning is not enough to stop an interrogation and get a lawyer. We can see that Sam is being very cautious in how he responds to Detective Short. When he pauses to take a sip of water after being asked a question, it's likely that he was doing this as a stalling tactic to allow himself time to carefully pick his words. Sam appears to have some prior knowledge about interrogations, as he is correct that the detective doesn't have the suspect's best interests in mind. He appears reluctant to speak as he likely doesn't want to incriminate himself or his brother further by saying the wrong thing.
Why did he call you for this extended period of time on that specific day? Specifically the day that he's under arrest for murder. You know what I mean? Extensive amount of phone calls that day. For elaborate amount of time. Completely outside the norm of you guys' normal communication process. Why are you in Arizona? Why did you fly halfway across the country? Why did you obtain a new phone with a new phone number to do this? Why are you here picking up a gun that you know belongs to Mark? If you don't know what he did, then why would you do that?
We know what he allegedly did.
Okay, I understand that. So you know he allegedly murdered somebody?
Correct.
Okay, so why are you picking up a gun that belonged to him? Specifically, when I told you, when I interviewed you back in Wisconsin, do you know Mark has any guns? And you were like, nope. I don't think he's allowed to have one on base. You know what I mean?
Yes, sir.
So what's the deal?
I would like to collect all of Mark's possessions as possible. If that gun is his possession, I would like to collect that as well.
Sam refuses to tell the detective why he tried to dispose of Mark's gun, but there are a few possible explanations. Mark claimed that Sam was his closest brother. It's possible that he called Sam and used their close relationship to convince Sam he had to get rid of the gun. Not because Mark killed someone, but because police thought he did. It's more than evident that Sam has a distrust of law enforcement, so it would make sense for Mark to prey upon this feeling in order to persuade his brother that if Sam didn't dispose of this weapon, the police were going to frame Mark for something he didn't do.
It's attempted destruction of evidence, attempted tampering with evidence, attempted hindering prosecution. I mean, there's 2 felonies in there. Like, this is a big deal. So do you want to help me understand it? Do you want to explain it to me? Do you want to...
I don't think so. What is next in this process?
The next part is you go down to jail.
Okay. The way I see it, talking and discussing this with you, you will only use it against me to make these charges stick, and to further incriminate Mark.
Since Sam clearly understands how his words could be used against him, it's odd that he's still agreeing to sit here rather than asking for an attorney or outright refusing to respond. It's possible that his curiosity got the better of him, and he wants to find out how much the detectives know about Mark's crime. It's also possible that Sam is afraid and feels that if he at least agrees to sit in the interrogation room, he may be able to dodge the consequences of having helped Mark. With Sam's interview at a stalemate, the detectives are forced to look elsewhere for information. Throughout their entire investigation, the one thing they haven't been able to deduce clearly is motive. Was this just a random killing? Or was there something more at play here? While it's clear that Mark had some sort of grudge against Mennonites, it made no sense that someone with no prior criminal history would suddenly plan an elaborate murder 6 hours away from their home and target someone they'd never even heard of before. At least that's what Detective Nagel thought until she spoke with some Mennonites from Wisconsin and discovered that Mark's past wasn't quite as clean as it seemed. In a phone interview with Mark's former pastor, James Luke Martin, Detective Nagel learned that no one at Mark's former church was surprised to learn that he'd now been arrested in connection with such a heinous crime, as Mark had a reputation for taking revenge on others. Mark had also allegedly been involved in several robberies at the church. When the church tried to punish him for his involvement, his parents stepped in and decided to leave the church for being too critical of Mark. However, this was not the end of Mark's criminal activities. While living with his sister in Pennsylvania, Mark was accused of stealing money from the local Mennonites. Soon after, everyone who accused Mark of stealing money discovered that their cars suspiciously stopped working. After investigating further, these Mennonites found that sand had been placed into the oil pans of their cars, causing their engines to stop working. While those affected weren't able to prove it was Mark who put the sand there, it doesn't seem like a coincidence given his interest in mechanics and apparent taste for revenge. Detective Nagel then spoke to Jonathan Martin, the son of Mark's pastor, who provided further examples of Mark getting caught stealing. Jonathan even said that when he was angry, Mark would prowl around the Mennonite community to see what he could find. After speaking with Jonathan's son, Detective Nagel learned that Mark had allegedly robbed the Martins' family store. However, charges were never pressed due to the fact that the store security camera had its memory card stolen, so there was never visual proof of Mark being the one who robbed the store. While there may not have been any evidence of Mark's involvement at the time of the robbery, Detective Nagel was able to actually find the security footage from that robbery on Mark's own phone, and it showed a man with Mark's height and build robbing the store. In one of the photos, a car that looked suspiciously like Mark's could be seen in the background. With these photos, Detective Nagel had what appeared to be tangible proof that these accusations against Mark weren't just hearsay. Eventually, the detective got a hold of Jared Ulrich, a man who claimed to be Mark's partner in crime in the past. Jared openly confessed to Detective Nagel about all the robberies he'd allegedly committed with Mark, and he described in detail how Mark would try to frame other people in the community for their crimes. There definitely seemed to be evidence that Jared may have been telling the truth, as a series of texts were found on Mark's phone, all of which had been recently deleted. In these texts, Mark talked to Sam about Jared never understanding the real cost of getting caught. Mark then asked Sam to remotely wipe Jared's phone, something that he also asked Sam to do to his own phone after he fell under suspicion for Sasha's murder. While all of this information against Mark was damning enough, there was still one more disturbing truth to learn. Through many more interviews, Detective Nagel was eventually put in contact with Andrew and Galen Headings, a pair of brothers who were close with Mark during his time in Wisconsin. Andrew recounted a time where he had confronted Mark for stealing, and during their conversation, Mark was so cold and bitter that Andrew said he feared for his life. Galen had an even more disturbing revelation for Detective Nagel, as he told her about Mark's alleged inappropriate actions towards women. According to Galen, Mark confessed to him that he had allegedly assaulted a young girl his sister was babysitting when he was around 10 to 13 years old. However, this claim has never been publicly proven, and there's no evidence of it being true. Still, with this information, it became clear that Mark always had the capacity to harm others, and allegedly had many times in the past. Mark's motive in harming Sasha was also more evident than ever. All the unfounded anger and resentment he had towards the Mennonite community had been steadily growing over the years, and as it did, Mark took his revenge against them further and further. Up to this point, charges had never been pressed against Mark, and he felt like he could outsmart anyone, even the police. With this misplaced confidence, Mark decided to see if he could get away with the ultimate crime, murder. It appears that Mark had gone to the Mennonite community that day in search of a victim, and tragically, Sasha was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Mark grabbed her from her car late at night and no one saw a thing. Still, that didn't prevent him from getting caught. Unfortunately for him, while no one had previously pressed any charges for his theft, the state of Arizona was more than happy to charge Mark for Sasha's murder and put him on trial. Mark's trial began on September 24, 2021. In January of 2022, the jury found Mark guilty on charges of kidnapping and first-degree murder, earning him a life sentence. For his help in covering up Mark's crimes, Sam Gooch pleaded guilty and received 3 years probation. With both Sam and Mark dealt with, Sasha Krause and her family finally received the justice they deserve.
The Lord's Caliber, based on a true story. Prologue. The Mask, the 26th of October 2017. Owyhee County Sheriff's Office. The interrogation room smelled of stale coffee and floor wax, a scent that never quite covered the underlying odor of human anxiety. But the man sitting across from the detective didn't smell like anxiety. He didn't twitch. He didn't sweat. He sat with the stillness of a predator waiting for the grass to move. Nick Vandenberg looked normal. That was the most terrifying thing about him. He had the build of a man who might have served, or at least wanted people to think he had. He spoke of the Corps and combat with a practiced ease, wearing his stolen valor like a second skin. It's like putting a mask on, Nick said, his voice flat, devoid of the tremors that usually accompany the confession to murder. He looked at his hands, then back at the detective. The whole situation didn't even weigh on me. He was talking about a boy, a father, a son who had vanished into the sagebrush 4 months ago. Nick spoke of the killing not as a tragedy, but as a chore he had completed and forgotten. He believed he was smarter than the men in the room. He believed the desert would keep his secrets. He was wrong. But the truth was far worse than the detectives had imagined. Nick didn't just want to kill one hitchhiker. He wanted a little community of little killers. Patty, the drifter. The 17th of June 2017. Junction City, Oregon. The asphalt shimmered in the heat. A river of gray cutting through the green heart of Oregon. Hunter Tash Smith stood on the shoulder of the road, his thumb out, his silhouette small against the vastness of the world. He was 18 years old. In his pocket, he had a phone and a wallet. In his heart, he had a desperate, naive optimism. He was leaving Junction City, leaving the mistakes and the stagnation behind. He was bound for Nebraska. In Ezisia, Astor, Patusiye, there was a job waiting for him there. Something steady, something real. It was his chance to provide for his infant daughter, to become the father she deserved. He had told his mother, Heather, that he was taking a Greyhound bus. It was a white lie. The kind sons tell mothers so they can sleep at night. Buses cost money he didn't want to spend, and there was a romance to the road that called to him. He wanted to feel the miles under his feet. He felt it, that electric hum in the air that says everything is about to change. For 3 days, luck was on his side. He caught rides, watched the landscape shift from the lush Willamette Valley to the high, dry deserts of the east. On June 20th, he reached Burns, Oregon. The air was drier here, smelling of dust and sage. He didn't catch a bus. Instead, a car slowed down. It wasn't a creeping, predatory slowdown, but a friendly one. Inside were people who looked safe. A nice couple, or so he would text his Aunt Raquel later. They smiled. They offered him air conditioning and conversation. "Where you headed?" the driver asked. "Nebraska," Hunter said, tossing his bag in. "Eventually, we can get you to Idaho," the driver said. "Come on. You look like you could use a meal." Hunter climbed in. He didn't know that the road he was on had just taken a detour from which there was no return. He didn't know he had just stepped into the orbit of a monster. Part I, The Den, the 21st of June 2017. Melba, Idaho. The house in Melba felt chaotic, a transient space occupied by people who were all running from something. There was Nick Vandenberg, the man who had picked Hunter up. There was Montana Reed, a 20-year-old woman with eyes that darted nervously. Nick's ex-girlfriend, who still shared his roof. And there was Willie Keith Raby, a 33-year-old man with a history of bad decisions and warrants hanging over his head. They fed Hunter dinner. It was a surreal act of domesticity. They sat around the table, passing plates, laughing. Hunter, relaxed by the food and the shelter, let his guard down. He told them about his daughter. He told them about his plans. Nick watched him. He didn't look at Hunter the way a host looks at a guest. He looked at him the way a scientist looks at a lab rat. "You ever go shooting?" Nick asked, wiping his mouth. "Not really," Hunter admitted. "We go out to the desert," Nick said. "Shoot rabbits. We call it bunny bumping." "Bunny bumping?" Hunter laughed. "Sounds interesting." "It's a rush," Keith added, though he wouldn't meet Hunter's eyes. Keith was fidgeting, rubbing his face, a gesture of deep discomfort. Nick stood up. "Let's go. We'll show you a good time, then I'll drop you off in Mountain Home. You can catch your ride from there." It was a lie. There was no plan to go to Mountain Home. As they gathered their things, Nick pulled Keith aside. The text messages had already been sent, digital whispers of a dark intent. Nick had written about a thirst to kill, a need to spill blood. Keith had thought it was a joke, or maybe he just wanted to believe it was. Is this for real? Keith whispered. Nick didn't answer. They piled into the car. Montana sat in the front, Keith in the back with Hunter. The sun was setting, casting long, bloody shadows across the Owyhee Desert. The landscape here was brutal and beautiful, volcanic rock, dry scrub, and silence. They drove deep into the Bruno Desert. The civilization of Melba faded into the rearview mirror. Where are the rabbits? Hunter asked, looking out the window at the deepening gloom. Out here, Nick said. Just a bit further. Part A, the desert. The 22nd of June 2017. Owyhee County, near Hot Springs Road. The car crunched to a halt on a gravel turnout. The silence of the desert was immense, a heavy blanket that swallowed the sound of the engine ticking as it cooled. Let's shoot some rocks first, Nick suggested. They got out. The air was cooling, but the ground still radiated the day's heat. Nick handed Hunter a rifle. He aimed at a rock in the distance and fired. Crack. Dust puffed up. Nice shot, Nick said. Empty it out. Hunter fired until the rifle clicked dry. He lowered the weapon, a grin on his face. He turned around to share the moment with Nick. That was... Hunter stopped. Nick was standing by the driver's door. The .45 was in his hand. He wasn't aiming at a rabbit. He wasn't aiming at a rock. He was aiming at Hunter's stomach. Why? Hunter stammered. The grin slid off his face, replaced by a confusion so profound it hadn't yet registered as fear. Nick pulled the trigger. The boom of the .45 shattered the desert silence. Hunter doubled over, hit in the gut. He stumbled back, dropping the empty rifle. Why did you do that? Hunter screamed, his voice cracking with pain and disbelief. Don't kill me. I have a kid. Don't fucking kill me. Montana turned away, unable to watch, but unable to leave. Keith sat frozen in the car, a coward's witness to a slaughter. Hunter fell onto his back, kicking his legs, trying to scramble away from the man walking calmly toward him. Nick moved with a terrifying lack of urgency. He walked up to the boy writhing in the dust. Please, Hunter begged. Nick stood over him. He fired again. 2 shots to the head. The screaming stopped. The silence rushed back in, louder than before. Nick stood there for a moment, looking down. Then, he did something that chilled Keith to the bone. He knelt and began to pat the ground. What are you doing? Keith croaked. Looking for my shells, Nick said calmly. Can't leave brass. He found the casings. Then he looked at Hunter's body. The boy was still twitching, the body's electrical systems firing their last desperate signals. Nick frowned. He claimed later, in a twisted attempt at morality, that he couldn't stand the sound of the struggling to breathe. He raised the gun one last time. Point blank into the face. Done, Nick said. He turned to the car, where Keith and Montana were paralyzed with horror. Get out, Nick ordered Keith. Strip him. I don't want to, Keith stammered. He sat in our house, Nick said, his voice hard. Under the vast, uncaring stars of the Idaho sky. They stripped the boy, who had just wanted to get to Nebraska. They dragged his body into a ditch. They piled his clothes, his jeans, his shirt, the shoes that had walked across Oregon and set them on fire. Nick went through Hunter's wallet. He took the ID, a trophy. Let's go, Nick said. They drove away, leaving Hunter Tash Smith alone in the dark, 18 years old and forever frozen in time. Patif. The Ghost. August 2017. October 2017. Silence is not empty. It is full of answers waiting to be found. For Hunter's family, the silence was a physical weight. Hunter had stopped texting. He had stopped calling. His friend in Nebraska called Hunter's mother, Heather. I haven't heard from him, she said. On August 4th, they filed a missing persons report. The police in Junction City took the details. But a hitchhiker missing in the American West is like a needle missing in a haystack that spans 3 states. Summer turned to autumn. The heat in the Bruno Desert began to break. In Owyhee County, rumors began to swirl. Small towns talk. People whisper. And Nick Vandenberg, for all his claims of being a smart dude, was plagued by an arrogant need to be involved. When the news broke that a body might be out there, Nick couldn't help himself. He saw a news story on Facebook about the missing hitchhiker. He typed, "This is close to where I live." Then, a second comment, one that would later haunt the courtroom. "If it was me, I wouldn't have left him in the desert. Lol. Too much risk of hunters stumbling on a dead body. Lol." It was a taunt. On October 21st, hunters, real hunters, not men hunting humans, were walking through the sagebrush near the Bruno Desert. They saw something pale against the volcanic earth. Human remains. The call went out. The Idaho State Police arrived. The body was decomposed, ravaged by the elements and scavengers. But the cause of death was clear. This was no accident. This was an execution. DNA was taken from Heather Smith. It was a match. The waiting was over. The nightmare had begun. Parve. The interrogation, the 24th of October 2017. Detective Noah sat in the interview room. He had the Facebook comments. Montana came in first. She looked young, scared, and entirely out of her depth. "I don't know why he would be talking about something like that if he didn't do it," Montana said, her voice trembling. "Oh my gosh, this is so crazy that he's being accused of this." "No one's accusing him yet," the detective said softly. "We're just talking." He watched her. He saw the cracks in her story before she even spoke them. "Did he ever talk to you about the term bunny bumping?" the detective asked. "Yeah," she whispered. "Going out and shooting rabbits in the desert." The detective leaned in. "I'm trying to reiterate. Stay away from the guy, okay? Don't talk to him about this." She nodded. But the detective knew she wouldn't listen. The next day, Montana was back. She had called Nick. She had tipped him off. But in doing so, she had panicked. "I know you know something," the detective said, his voice dropping the friendly veneer. "The truth is going to set everybody free." Montana broke. It wasn't a slow crumble. It was a dam bursting. "I know one day, Nick came home with this kid," she sobbed. "He said he picked him up. We were going to feed him dinner. And then, Nick was going to drop him off." She lied, clinging to the last shreds of her innocence. But the detective kept pushing. He brought in Keith. Keith was a different animal. Harder, yet more brittle. He tried to block the detective out, rubbing his eyes, hiding his face. "We started driving," Keith said, his voice raspy. "We started shooting rabbits. And in the midst of this story, Montana, she was sitting in front of me." The detective caught it. "So you were there? And Montana was there?" The trap snapped shut. When they finally brought Nick in on October 26th, he was ready. He had his story rehearsed. He was the Good Samaritan. He had given the kid $20 and dropped him at a Chevron in Mountain Home. "I think that's kind of crazy," Nick said when the detective suggested the body in the desert was the same kid. "That would instantly point a finger at me." "Nick," the detective said, standing up, "I know you shot him." Nick stared at him. The mask didn't slip. It just hardened. "How do you know that?" Nick asked. "I have the proof. I have the 45 bullets. I have witnesses." Nick paused. He calculated. He realized the nice guy routine was dead, so he switched to the soldier routine. He turned around. "I heard the gun click," Nick lied, spinning a tale of self-defense. "I reacted. I shot him." "You shot him in the head?" "Reflex," Nick said. "Military training." It was all lies. There was no military training. There was no self-defense. There was only a man who wanted to kill, who wanted to start a community of killers, and who had chosen a random boy on a lonely road to start his collection. Epilogue, Justice. 2019. The desert eventually gave up all its secrets. Montana confessed that Nick had planned to do it again. He wanted to fake breakdowns on Highway 51 kill the drivers, and burn their cars. He had told them it was their turn next. Nick Vandenberg, the man who thought he could outsmart the world, pled guilty. He was sentenced to life in prison. He would be an old man before he ever saw the sky without bars across it. Montana received 15 years. Keith received 26. Hunter Tash Smith never made it to Nebraska. He never started that new job, but his story traveled further than he ever could. It became a warning, a tragedy, and a testament to the fact that while evil may wear a mask, it cannot hide forever in the high desert sun. The Lord's Caliber. Part 2. The Descent. Chapter 1. The Spider's Parlor. The house in Melba, Idaho, did not look like a slaughterhouse. It looked like a refuge. To 18-year-old Hunter Tash Smith, standing on the threshold with the dust of the Oregon-Idaho border on his boots, it looked like a miracle. He had left Junction City with a thumb out and a heart full of fragile hope, bound for Nebraska, for a job. He had told his family he was on a Greyhound bus, a small kindness to keep them from worrying, but the road had called to him, and the road had answered in the form of Nick Vandenberg. Nick stood in the kitchen, a man who wore his stolen valor like a suit of armor. He moved with a stiff, calculated precision, the kind he claimed to have learned in the Marine Corps overseas. He told stories of combat, of taking lives, of the burden of being a warrior. He didn't know that the combat was a lie, a fantasy constructed by a man who treated life like a video game. "You hungry?" Nick asked. "I appreciate it, man," Hunter said, dropping his pack. "Really." Montana Reed, Nick's ex-girlfriend, who still lived in the orbit of his strange gravity, watched from the living room. She was young, trapped in a web of dependency and fear. She knew Nick. She knew his moods. But even she didn't realize how dark the night was about to turn. She saw a kid Hunter who looked hopeful. He was optimistic that this trip was his chance to make things right for his family. The atmosphere in the house was thick, a humidity of unsaid things. Nick was texting. His fingers flew across the screen of his phone, sending messages that would later serve as a digital confession. He wasn't texting Montana. He was texting Willie Keith Raby. Chapter 2. Digital Omen. Miles away, Willie Keith Raby's phone buzzed. Keith was a man already living on the edge, with warrants for his arrest hanging over him like a storm cloud. The message from Nick was cryptic, dark. It spoke of a thirst to kill. Keith stared at the glowing text. Is he joking? Keith had known Nick for years, but this was different. Nick was talking about the hitchhiker he had just picked up. He was calling the kid a liar, saying he was going to end him. "I thought it was just fucking joking," Keith would later tell himself, a mantra to ward off the guilt. But deep down, the dread began to coil in his stomach. Nick didn't joke about things like that. Nick had plans. Nick wanted a little community of little killers. He wanted accomplices. He wanted an audience. Keith drove to the house, the tires humming on the asphalt. When he walked through the door, he saw Hunter sitting at the table, eating, laughing, completely unaware that his host had just texted a friend about killing him. But it was Nick who terrified Keith. His persona was different, Keith observed. It wasn't the Nick he knew. It was something colder, something detached. Nick looked at Keith, eyes hard, communicating a silent command. "Play along. We're going to take him out," Nick said, his voice casual, masking the malice. "Show him a good time. Go shooting." Hunter looked up, wiping his mouth. "Shooting?" "Bunny bumping," Montana chimed in, her voice tight, "going out and shooting rabbits in the desert." "I've never really been," Hunter admitted, eager to please, eager to bond with these men who had taken him in. "Sounds fun." "It is," Nick said. He glanced at Keith. "We'll go to the spot near the Bruno Desert." Chapter 3. The Departure. The sun was beginning to dip, casting long shadows across the yard. The air cooled, but the tension inside the house only spiked. Nick went to his room. He retrieved his 1911 pistol. The .45 caliber. He called it the Lord's Caliber. It was a heavy, brutal weapon, a tool of war that he treated with a fetishistic reverence. He tucked it away, out of sight, but within reach. Hunter gathered his things. He thought he was leaving for mountain home, for the next leg of his journey to Nebraska. He thought he was minutes away from being back on the road to his daughter. "Ready?" Nick asked. "Yeah," Hunter said. "Let's do it." They piled into the car. Montana took the front seat. Keith, heavy with the knowledge of the text messages, slid into the back. Hunter sat beside him. As the car pulled out of the driveway, leaving the safety of the house behind, Nick began to drive toward the desert. He didn't head toward the highway that would take Hunter to safety. He headed toward the nothingness. Hunter looked out the window, watching the civilization of Melba fade into sagebrush and rock. He felt the car accelerate, felt the optimism of the fresh start. He didn't know that the man driving the car had already decided his fate. He didn't know that he was sitting next to a man who had been warned. The radio might have been playing, or maybe it was just the sound of the wind rushing past. Nick was calm. He was wearing the mask he would later describe to detectives, the persona that allowed him to function without conscience. "Ever shoot a rifle?" Nick asked, catching Hunter's eye in the rearview mirror. "No," Hunter said. "You'll learn today," Nick said. The car turned onto a gravel road, dust billowing up behind them like a shroud. They were entering the kill zone. The community of killers was about to hold its first initiation. The Lord's Caliber, Part 3, The Kill Box, Chapter 4. Echoes. In the canyon, the car crunched over the gravel, the tires kicking up dust that hung in the twilight air like a specter. They were deep in the Owyhee Desert now, near the Bruno Canyon. It was a landscape of harsh beauty, volcanic rock, sagebrush, and a silence so profound it felt heavy. This was a place where things could be lost and never found. Nick killed the engine. The sudden absence of the motor's hum was jarring. "This is it," he said. Hunter Tash Smith opened the door and stepped out. He stretched, breathing in the dry air. He was 18, full of energy, still believing this was just a detour on his way to a new life in Nebraska. He didn't know he was standing in his own grave. Nick popped the trunk. He pulled out his rifles and the 1911 pistol, the Lord's Caliber. He handed a rifle to Hunter. "Go ahead," Nick said, gesturing toward the emptiness. "Shoot at that rock over there." "How? Do. Hunter took the weapon. It was heavy in his hands. He raised it to his shoulder, squinting against the fading light. He aimed at a rock in the distance and pulled the trigger. Crack. The sound slapped against the canyon walls and rolled back. "Nice," Nick said from behind him. "Empty it out." Hunter fired again and again. He was having fun. He was a young man shooting guns in the desert with new friends. He fired until the magazine was dry, the rifle clicking on an empty chamber. "That was awesome," Hunter said, lowering the gun. He spun around, a smile on his face, ready to hand the rifle back to Nick. But Nick wasn't smiling. Nick was standing by the driver's door of the car. He had moved with that predator's quiet he was so proud of. In his hand, the 1911 was raised. It wasn't pointed at a rock. It was pointed at Hunter. Chapter 5. The Ambush. For a split second, Hunter didn't understand. The smile hadn't yet left his face. His brain couldn't reconcile the friendly dinner, the drive, and the man now aiming a .45 caliber pistol at his stomach. "Nick?" Hunter started to say. Nick didn't speak. He didn't hesitate. He pulled the trigger. The boom of the .45 was deeper, louder than the rifle. The bullet slammed into Hunter's stomach. The force of it doubled him over. He dropped the empty rifle into the dust. "Why did you do that?" Hunter screamed. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated terror. He fell backward onto the ground, clutching his gut. "Why did you do that? Don't fucking kill me." Keith, sitting in the back seat of the car, watched through the window, frozen. Montana, in the front seat, looked away, unable to watch the horror she had helped facilitate. Hunter was scrambling backward, kicking his legs, trying to put distance between himself and the man walking toward him. "I have a kid," Hunter pleaded, his voice breaking. "Don't fucking kill me." Nick walked calmly. He didn't run. He didn't yell. He just closed the distance. He stood over the boy who was writhing in the dirt, the boy who had just wanted a ride to a bus station. "Please," Hunter gasped. Nick raised the gun again. He aimed for the head. He fired twice. Hunter's body jerked, then went still. Chapter 6. The Mercy of a Monster. The silence returned to the desert, rushing in to fill the void left by the gunshots. Nick knelt down. He wasn't checking for a pulse to save a life. He was checking his work. He began to scour the ground around him. Looking for casings, he muttered. He picked up the brass shells, pocketing the evidence. He was, as he liked to tell people, a smart fucking dude. He looked back at Hunter. The boy was destroyed, but his chest was still hitching. He was still breathing. A ragged, terrible sound. Nick frowned. Later, he would tell detectives that the sound of Hunter struggling to breathe triggered him. He would frame it as a mercy, a kindness to stop the suffering he had caused. "I couldn't listen to it," Nick said. He stood over Hunter one last time. He pointed the .45 directly at the boy's face. Point blank, 45. Point blank, 45. He pulled the trigger. The breathing stopped. Hunter Tash Smith was gone. Nick turned back to the car. His face was a mask of indifference. "Get out," he ordered Keith. Keith stumbled out of the car, his legs shaking. The reality of what he had just witnessed was crashing down on him. "Strip him," Nick commanded. I don't want to," Keith stammered. "I didn't want to be a part of this." "He sat in our house," Nick said, his voice cold and practical. "His clothes have fibers from our house. We have to burn them." Under the vast expanse of the Idaho sky, they went to work. They stripped the clothes from the body, the jeans, the shirt, everything but the underwear. Nick went through Hunter's pockets. He found the wallet. He took out the ID. He didn't burn that. He kept it. A trophy for the killer he aspired to be. They dragged the body away from the road, leaving it to the desert and the coyotes. Then they piled the clothes and set them on fire. The flames licked up into the darkness. A small, unholy pyre consuming the last traces of the boy who had just wanted a fresh start. Chapter 7. The Community. The drive back to Melba was different. The air in the car was heavy with the metallic scent of adrenaline and guilt. Nick was energized. The act was done. He had crossed a line he had been flirting with for years. He turned to Keith and Montana. "It's your turn next," Nick said. Montana froze. Keith stared out the window at the passing darkness. "We want a little community of little killers," Nick explained. He had a vision. He wasn't satisfied with just one. He talked about finding more victims. He talked about driving out to Highway 51, pretending his car was broken down, and ambushing whoever stopped to help. He would kill them, drive their cars into the desert, and burn them. He wanted a tribe. He wanted accomplices bound to him by blood and secrets. "I just went along with it," Montana would later say, "because I didn't know what else to do." They arrived back at the house in Melba. The dinner dishes were likely still in the sink. The house looked exactly the same as they had left it, but everything had changed. They had left as 3 misfits and a drifter. They returned as a murderer and his 2 terrified accomplices. Nick Vandenberg went to sleep that night with the calmness of a man who felt no weight on his soul. "The whole situation didn't even weigh on me," he would later admit. But in the desert, under the cold stars, the remains of Hunter Smith lay alone, waiting for the seasons to turn, waiting for the hunters to find him, waiting for the silence to be broken. Chapter 8. The Void. The silence began on June 21st, 2017. It was a sudden, jarring halt to the digital noise of a young life. Hunter Tash Smith had been a steady stream of updates and plans. On June 20th, he had messaged a friend in Nebraska, the destination of his hope, telling them he was in Burns, Oregon, and catching a bus to Idaho. Around the same time, his Aunt Raquel received a message that felt like an exhale of relief. Hunter had been picked up by a nice couple. They were kind people, he said. They were letting him stay the night to shower and sleep in a real bed. They were going to drop him at the Ontario, Oregon bus station the next day. It was the last lie he was ever fed. The drop-off never happened. The bus left without him. The phone went dark. July bled into August. The silence grew heavy, transforming from a nuisance into a dread. In Nebraska, Hunter's friend waited, but the young man never arrived. Worried, the friend finally contacted Hunter's mother, Heather Smith. "Where is he?" The question hung in the air, unanswered. On August 4th, the family filed a missing persons report. But the American West is vast, a sea of sagebrush and mountains that can swallow a hitchhiker whole. 4 agonizing months passed. Hope began to curdle into despair. The family waited for a call, a text, a sign. On October 21st, the phone finally rang. But it wasn't Hunter. Chapter 9. The Discovery. The Bruno Desert is a harsh place to keep a secret. The wind shifts the sand. The scavengers are persistent. Hunters, men looking for game, not bodies, were moving through the scrub in Owyhee County when they saw it. Human remains. They were located in the desolation of the desert, near the area where Nick Vandenberg and his friends liked to go bunny bumping. The condition of the body told a grim story immediately. The cause of death appeared to be anything but natural. The Idaho State Police arrived. They looked at the estimated age of the deceased and felt a sinking recognition. It matched the description of the missing boy from Junction City. They needed science to confirm what their gut already knew. DNA was taken from Hunter's mother and compared against the unidentified remains. The match was conclusive. This lie was a lie. The nice couple hadn't taken him to the bus station. They had taken him to hell. With the confirmation, the family's worst nightmare solidified into reality. All hope that he would someday return was lost. But even as the family grieved, a bizarre and twisted motive was beginning to surface in the digital world. Chapter 10. The Digital Ghost. Nick Vandenberg could not stay away. He was drawn to the crime, tethered to it by a narcissism that demanded attention. In Owyhee County, rumors were already circulating about the body found in the desert. When a local news story about the discovery was posted on Facebook, Nick shared it. It was a brazen act of camouflage, the killer posing as a concerned citizen. He commented, "This is close to where I live." It was a mundane comment, designed to blend in. But Nick couldn't help himself. He had to be the smartest person in the room, even if the room was the entire internet. He posted a second comment, a joke that was actually a confession wrapped in a dark laugh. "If it was me, I wouldn't have left him in the desert. Lol. Too much risk of Hunter stumbling on a dead body. Lol." The carelessness was breathtaking. It was not the kind of thing an innocent person posts about a tragedy. It raised eyebrows. It captured the full attention of law enforcement. The police looked at the name, Nick Vandenberg. They looked at his associates, and they found a thread to pull. Her name was Montana Reed. Chapter 11. The First Thread. Montana Reed was 20 years old, Nick's ex-girlfriend, and had been living with him until recently. Detectives found her and brought her in for questioning on October 24th, just 3 days after Hunter's remains were found. The detectives started slow, circling the perimeter of the truth. They talked about Nick. Nick has claimed that during the course of his service in the Marine Corps, he'd engaged in combat, the detective noted. As a result, he'd had to resort to taking lives. Montana nodded, feeding the myth. She spoke highly of Nick and their roommate, Willie Kitrabi, but the detective pressed. He asked a question that cut through the character references. "Did he ever talk to you about the term bunny bumping? Going out and shooting rabbits in the desert?" Montana clarified. "Yeah, we did that." The detective narrowed the focus. He asked where they went shooting. Montana, perhaps not realizing the trap, admitted they frequented a spot near the Bruno Desert, coincidentally, exactly where Hunter's body was found. The detective leaned in. He knew she was holding back. Again, I'm trying to reiterate, stay away from the guy, okay? He warned her. Don't talk to him about this. Montana feigned shock. Oh my gosh, this is so crazy that he's being accused of this. No one's accusing him yet, the detective corrected. You just suspect that he did it because people are talking about it. The interview ended. Montana walked out, ostensibly a witness. But the detective knew the pressure was mounting. He knew that secrets in a conspiracy of three are like water in a cracked vase eventually. They leak. Chapter 12. The Wire. Montana did not listen. The pull of the conspiracy was too strong. The next day, she met with the detective again. She had broken the one rule he gave her. I talked to him, talking about this stuff, she admitted. So you talked to Nick after you talked to me? The detective asked, frustration edging his voice. Yeah. He messaged me, so I tried to keep it short. It was a critical error, or perhaps a calculated move by a guilty conscience. Going straight to Nick suggested she was involved, trying to align their stories. The detective decided to drop the hammer. The truth is going to set everybody free, okay? He told her, staring her down. I know you know something. I'm looking at you right now, and I know you do. Montana crumbled. The dam broke. I know one day Nick came home with this kid, she whispered. He said that he picked him up and he was a hitchhiker. We were going to feed him dinner. She spun a new story, one where they took the kid shooting, but then Nick dropped him off. She claimed she wasn't there for the shooting. You haven't been honest with me, the detective said. You were there. You know this happened. He proposed a test. He asked her to call Nick, while the police listened in. Montana dialed. The phone rang. Nick answered. The police left me a message asking about the body, Montana said, her voice trembling. Why would they be asking me? I don't know either, Nick replied. His voice went up at the end of the sentence, an upward inflection that betrayed uncertainty. It was a lack of confidence. A tell. Do you know anything? Montana asked. No, Nick said. But it wasn't a firm no. It was weak. That seems really suspicious to me, that they could call you and talk about a body, Nick said, his paranoia rising. They would just ask you to return the call. He started to spiral. You know everything I know. Why are you asking me? Because I don't know what to do. And I'm nervous, Montana said. You have nothing to be nervous about, Nick said, trying to soothe her, trying to soothe himself. I picked up 100 hitchhikers over the last 3 fucking years. He hung up. He thought he was safe. He thought he was smarter than them. But he had just confirmed he was rattled. And the detectives were closing in. The next day, they would bring him in. And the mask would finally fall. The Lord's Caliber, Part V. The House of Cards, Chapter 13. The Recognition. The 25th of October, 2017. The air in the interview room felt thin, recycled, and heavy with impending doom. Montana Reed sat across from the detectives for the 3rd time. The game of cat and mouse was ending. The trap had already snapped shut. The detective placed a photograph on the table. It wasn't a crime scene photo, but an image of a young man full of life. You recognize that gentleman? The detective asked. Montana stared at the face. It was the face she had seen across the dinner table, the face she had seen in the back seat of the car, the face she had seen contorted in agony in the dirt. That's the kid, she whispered. How certain are you? Pretty certain, she said, her voice barely audible. Looks exactly like him. The detective nodded, his eyes locked on hers. The words hung there. 100% sure. Montana felt the walls closing in. The reality of the murder, not as a memory to be repressed, but as a legal fact, crashed down on her. She realized then that her loyalty to Nick Vandenberg was an anchor dragging her to the bottom of the ocean. Chapter 14. The Weak Link. The 25th of October, 2017. While Montana was crumbling, detectives were moving on the second pillar of Nick's community. Willie Keith Raby, known simply as Keith, was not hard to find. A man with 3 unrelated warrants for his arrest usually lives looking over his shoulder. When they picked him up, Keith knew he wasn't going home. But the detectives weren't interested in his outstanding warrants. We have been looking for you, because you are not a suspect. The detective lied smoothly, offering Keith a lifeline he desperately wanted to grab. You are a witness to what happened that day. Keith sat in the interrogation chair, his body language screaming discomfort. He rubbed his face and eyes constantly. Classic, eye-blocking behavior. A subconscious attempt to hide from the reality of what he was saying and the person he was lying to. How long have you known Nick? The detective asked. 5 or 6 years. Keith said, immediately trying to create distance. But I don't think Nick really wins the point. I didn't really hang out. You know what I mean? He was scrambling, trying to paint himself as a peripheral character. He claimed he wasn't even there when Nick picked Hunter up. Nick had messaged me and said that he picked up a hitchhiker, Keith said. But I knew it was going to be a while before I got there. The detective let him talk, let him spin his web. Then Keith let something slip, a glimpse into the darkness that had permeated the house before the murder. He started messaging me. Basically, like he had a thirst to kill or something like that. Keith admitted, his hand covering his mouth. A thirst to kill? The detective repeated, throughout the whole fucking night. I thought it was just fucking joking, Keith said, his voice rising in panic. But then, when I showed up at the house, his persona was different. It wasn't the same Nick. Keith was trying to portray himself as the unwitting observer of a madman, but the detective knew better. He knew Keith was in the car. What we talked together was, we started driving and we started shooting rabbits. Keith continued, the truth leaking out, and like Montana, she was sitting in front of me. Stop. The detective caught it instantly. Montana had claimed she wasn't there for the shooting. Keith had just placed all 3 of them at the scene. The stories were colliding. Chapter 15. The Breaking Point. The 25th of October 2017, afternoon. The detective returned to Montana. He had the ammunition he needed. You haven't been honest with me, he said, his voice hard. I know you haven't. I listened to the calls, and I listened to their interview yesterday. You were there when this happened. He offered her a choice. Help put Nick in prison, or go down with him. Self-preservation finally kicked in. Montana stopped protecting Nick and started protecting herself. So I didn't watch it happen, she wept. I looked away because I didn't want to watch it. Keith was in the car with me. Tell me exactly what happened, the detective commanded. She took a breath and transported the room back to the desert. Nick let the kid get out and go shoot at a rock, she said. That kid wanted to shoot one of Nick's bigger guns. He was just firing it just so he could fire it. And then, I just happened to fucking be watching him, Montana said, her eyes wide with the memory. The kid emptied out that gun, and he spun around. And I looked over at Nick, and I seen him with his pistol. It was pointing right towards him. She described the moment the world broke. Nick pulled the trigger and shot him right in the stomach, she said. The kid threw Nick's rifle down. And the kid couldn't fire back, she sobbed. And I know that the kid said something. The kid was like screaming, "Why did you do that? Why did you do that? Don't fucking kill me. I have a kid. Don't fucking kill me." The detective listened, stoic, recording the death screams of Hunter Tash Smith through the voice of his betrayer. And then Nick put 2 rounds in his head. She finished. The consensus was established. Keith and Montana were witnesses. Nick was the executioner. Now, they just needed the executioner to speak. Chapter 16. The Apex Predator. The 26th of October, 2017. Nick Vandenberg walked into the interview room with the confidence of a man who believed he was untouchable. He was smart fucking dude. After all, the reason we wanted to talk to you is because of a body that was found out in the desert, the detective began. I heard about that, Nick said casually. I actually saw the notice on Facebook. We're trying to track down any and everything that we can find out about who this person may be, the detective said, watching Nick closely. Okay, Nick said. And what happened to this person? Nick went still. Dead still. It was a freeze response, fight or flight, halted by the instinct to become invisible. He looked like an animal, realizing the predator has spotted it in the grass. Your name came up as somebody that we might want to talk to, the detective pressed. Nick tried to regain control. Now, I gotta tell you that, I'm straight up. I can't tell you a lot of stuff. I'll tell you what I can. Would you happen to know anything about this body being out in the desert? I don't know, Nick lied, his voice flat. I don't have any idea. He launched into his rehearsed story. He picked up the hitchhiker. He fed him dinner. But then, he added a new, disgusting detail to justify getting rid of him. He had made a comment about Montana, Nick claimed. He claimed he drove Hunter to a Chevron in Mountain Home, gave him $20, and left him there. The detective let him finish the lie. Then he dismantled it. What would you think if I told you that I thought the guy that was out there in the desert is the same guy? The detective asked. I think that's kind of crazy, Nick said, shifting. A little uncomfortable, that would instantly point a finger at me. The detective stood up. He left the room, letting Nick stew in the silence. When he returned, the pleasantries were gone. I know you were involved in what happened with him, the detective said, cutting Nick off. I know that you guys were out shooting rabbits. I know that he stayed there because he was shot. I also know that he was shot with a 1911 45, which you had. I also know that you shot him. Nick stared at him, the mask slipping. And why would you say that? He challenged. Because I know that. How do you know that? Nick demanded. I have the proof, the detective slammed down. I have the 45 bullets. I also have witnesses that were out there that said that you did. The room went silent. Nick Vandenberg realized there was no community of killers. There was only him and the two people who had just buried him. He took a breath. He couldn't deny the shooting anymore. So, he decided to twist it. Do you want to tell us about what happened out there? The detective asked. Yeah, Nick said. He shot at a rock, and he turned around, and I heard the gun click, and I reacted. And what'd you do? I shot him, Nick said. I went back to the same thing I was trying to do. In the military. Kama, muru, ni kama, maya. It was a lie. There was no military reflex. There was no threat. But the words were out. Nick Vandenberg had just confessed to murder. Chapter 17. The Mask of Sanity. The 26th of October, 2017. The interrogation room. The confession hung in the air. A toxic vapor. Nick Vandenberg had admitted to the shooting, framing it as a military reflex, a mercy killing to stop the sounds of a dying boy. But as the adrenaline faded, the true nature of the man sitting in the chair began to seep through the cracks of his soldier persona. The detective, sensing the walls of Nick's defense were down, asked the question that peered into the soul of the killer. Feel better to get off your chest a little bit? Nick shrugged, his demeanor chillingly casual. The whole situation didn't even weigh on me, he said. He looked at the detective, his eyes devoid of empathy, void of the haunting that usually plagues those who take a life. He searched for an analogy, something to explain his hollowness to a normal person. Easiest way to explain it would be like putting a mask on, Nick said. It was an admission of sociopathy, the ability to wear humanity like a costume, to mimic the emotions of others while feeling nothing underneath. He had worn the mask of a marine, a boyfriend, a host, but underneath, there was only the void. And then, the one I shot him with is buried in the desert, Nick added, referring to the murder weapon. Where? Nick leaned back, a faint smirk playing on his lips. That's not gonna tell you that. You'll never get that from me. It was a final power play. He had lost his freedom, but he wanted to keep one secret, one piece of the puzzle that was his alone. He wanted to control the narrative, even as the handcuffs clicked around his wrists. We are going to arrest you, the detective said. All right, Nick said, turning to the wall. Chapter 18. The Delusion. November 2017. Twin Falls County Jail. Prison did not break Nick Vandenberg's ego. It merely contained it. Behind bars, he clung to the belief that he was smarter than the system, that the police were incompetent, and that he could still maneuver his way out. He called his mother The recording tape spun, capturing the arrogance of a man in denial. "We were never read our rights," Nick complained. He believed that because he hadn't been Mirandized immediately upon walking into the station when he was technically free to leave, his confession would be thrown out. "I can't appreciate anyone," he muttered. He called his father, looking for validation. "I don't know if they've got all their ducks in a row yet," Nick said, his voice confident. "I don't think they do. I don't think they'd be good enough." He was wrong. They had the body, they had the ballistics, they had the accomplices. But Nick lived in a reality constructed by his own narcissism. He even called his new girlfriend Leticia. He had learned that the prosecution intended to use his text messages against him, the digital breadcrumbs he had left behind. Apparently, they're trying to use text messages, a group message between me, Keith, and Montana about shooting rabbits behind the barn. Nick scoffed. Shooting rabbits behind a barn. He couldn't see what the detective saw, that shooting rabbits was code, that the barn was the kill site, and that his texts were the blueprint of a murder. Chapter 19. The Community of Killers. Late October 2017. While Nick postured in jail, Montana Reed sat down with the detective one last time. The loyalty was gone, burned away by the reality of a 15-year prison sentence looming over her. She decided to empty the closet of all its skeletons. "Did Nick kill anybody else?" the detective asked. "Not that I know of," Montana said. "He just said that he wanted to." She revealed the true depth of Nick's ambition. Hunter Tash Smith wasn't supposed to be an isolated incident. He was supposed to be the first of many. He talked about doing it more afterwards, Montana said, her voice shaking. Like going on Highway 51 out in the middle of nowhere and acting like his car was broke down, and then end up killing whoever stopped. The plan was specific, brutal, and terrifyingly feasible. Nick wanted to turn the lonely highways of Idaho into his hunting grounds. But he didn't want to hunt alone. "He told me and Keith that it was our turn next," Montana whispered. "We wanted a little community of little killers." The detective stared at her. The nice couple who picked up a hitchhiker was actually a sleeper cell of aspiring serial killers. Nick Vandenberg didn't just want to be a murderer, he wanted to be a cult leader. He said when he lived in Caldwell, people would hire him to go take care of people they didn't like. Montana added. It was another lie, another fake Afghanistan story Nick told to bolster his image. But the desire behind the lie was real. He wanted to be a hitman. He wanted to be a soldier. In the end, he was just a butcher. Chapter 20. The Silence of the Sagebrush. August 2019. The wheels of justice turn slowly, but they grind exceedingly fine. Nick Vandenberg's delusions of outsmarting the prosecution eventually crumbled. The evidence was a mountain he could not climb. The ducks were in a row. He cut a deal. In late August of 2019, Nick stood before a judge. The arrogance was dampened. The mask, perhaps finally slipping, to reveal the fear underneath. He was sentenced to life in prison for first-degree murder. He would have to serve 30 years before he could even whisper the word parole. Montana Reed, the girl who looked away but didn't run away, pleaded guilty to criminal conspiracy and failure to notify authorities. She received 15 years. Willie Keith Raby, the man who watched from the back seat and helped burn the clothes, pleaded guilty to accessory to murder. He was sentenced to 26 years. The community of killers was disbanded, relocated to separate concrete cells. Hunter Tash Smith never made it to Nebraska. He never started the job that would provide for his daughter. He never saw his family again. But in the quiet corners of the Bruno Desert, where the wind whistles through the canyon and the sagebrush grows over the scars of the earth, the silence is no longer empty. It holds the memory of a young man who trusted the wrong smile, and the justice that finally came for the monsters who took him. The road goes on, but the detour is over.